This is Access LaPorte County, Channel 97. Coming up next is the June 22nd meeting of the Long Beach Town Council Special Meeting. You can find more information for this meeting at www.accesslaportecounty.org.
Everything's got to be set to temperature. All right. Welcome everybody to a special meeting of the Long Beach Town Council. I remind everybody to speak about 4 inches from the microphone. Make sure your microphone is turned on. Looks like the view is good. I see everybody. So the owl is set up properly. Since there's no agenda, I'm going to go and announce the agenda. First off, we're going to talk about whether to authorize us to do the engineering work on our CCMG grant. We're going to hopefully authorize the work on the air conditioner at the community center. We're going to again remind everybody that we're looking for volunteers to the Advisory Plan Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Tree Board. We're going to discuss whether to purchase special town email addresses for all of our committee members, or if not, which committee members we think we should do that for. And finally, talk about the tree removal at 1302 Lakeshore Drive. So first off, let's do the allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. First off, so we need to decide whether the town council we want to authorize Haas Engineering to do the engineering work for the CCMG grant. John Wall, I think, is out there on Zoom. John, do you remember what those numbers were for the engineering work? Oh, can't hear you. Are you muted, maybe? I can ask him to unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Okay, so essentially, the program that we were not able to get this year was the first call, what they call the first call, and that was going to be the $1 million plus program. We're going to hope to apply for that next year in January again. But what they do is they have what they call calls a year, which means you have 2 opportunities to submit your request. The second call is due in the month of July. Haas is going to work on that for us if we authorize this. Their engineering fees right now are somewhere south of $18,000. They actually were going to remove one of the streets, so it'll probably be a few thousand less than that for their engineering costs. The program will be in the neighborhood of about $175,000 if we do everything we hope to do, which is just basically pave some streets. We won't be doing any drainage work or structure work because of the second call in the time of the season. In other words, fall we're not able to do a bunch of drainage and get it done in time to still pave. So we'll do about $170,000 program. The 25% portion of that, the town's portion of that, would be in the neighborhood of around 60, and then you'd have, right around 43 or so, and then you'd have to add the engineering costs. So our total expenditure would be in the neighborhood of something south of 60,000, and that's about a 35% percentage of the overall project, meaning that the engineering costs are included in that 35%. That takes you a little above the 25%. So what we're asking this morning is just the council to authorize. The budget and finance committees were on board with this. We want you to authorize this roughly $18,000 in engineering costs. Again, it'll be south of that. It should be something around 17. But we want to authorize that this morning so they can get moving on this second call and get it applied for during the month of July.
And John, we had budgeted for the full amount of that CCMG grant when we did the budget, correct?
Well, again, what happens with the CCMG is it's tough to budget for it because we never know what we're going to get. So we always discussed, and the council, I think, gave us the nod early on. I know the budget and finance guys did for that full program, which was the $1 million program. So we didn't really. It's not really correct to say we budgeted for it, but we did intend to do that. And again, this 25% money is a good thing, I think, for the town.
Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to authorize Haas Engineering to do the engineering study. Does anybody want to make so moved? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. All right. So we need to do a roll call vote. Mary Lou? I'm an aye. Mike?
Aye.
And John Wall?
Aye.
John Coker?
Aye.
All right. Moving right along. Okay, so next up is the, discuss the air conditioner for the, community center. Doug, can I have you show me how to share on here?
Dr. LeMay, good morning. While you guys are trying to go ahead and try to share that screen, I just want to kind of give everybody a little bit of an introduction on why we're here this morning to discuss the community center and the air conditioning needs. First, I'd like to thank the committee, that being Joe, Larry, who's here, also Doug Wickstrom for all their work in recent weeks dealing with the air conditioning concerns at the community center. The community center is on the historical registry. It is a focal point to the town of Long Beach. I personally feel it is very important to this community to have our community center as an integral part of our community. And therefore, we need to take a serious look at the HVAC concerns that we have currently at the center. The system that is in place currently works off of heat pumps that are individually placed in each room. I've been told there's a total of 25 heat pumps that are in that building. And Doug is going to go into a little bit better discussion this morning along with Jim Crawford, who's here from Lakeshore Mechanical, to discuss this. A couple of things we need to also keep in mind this morning is we need to discuss the shipping costs that were not included with this proposal. We need to discuss the warranty, the overall warranty, and then any other additional questions as well. I have a series of questions that I had sent to Doug and the team to look at. I just want to make sure that we cover those as well. I'm not an expert with HVAC, that's why we have the experts here. So therefore, I feel that we need to spend the appropriate amount of time this morning to really discuss this and make sure we have all our questions answered before we move forward. So once Doug is done there, I'll introduce Doug Wickstrom, who will then introduce Jim Crawford from Lakeshore Mechanical, and they can go into an explanation as to the need of replacing the cooling tower. Also, before I close, I want to share with the council, I have before me the capital plan. John Wall, Mike Johnstone, integral parts of the team that worked on this capital plan. 2022, we have $60,000 that was set aside for capital expenditures for the community center. And then in 2023, we had $63,000 set aside for the community center. When I go to the explanations, in 2023, of that $63,000, we had the cooling tower as part of our capital plan. So I know we're a year ahead of that, but we did anticipate that the cooling tower did need to be replaced. $63,000 obviously was a low number. As with anything else currently with the inflation across our great country, this project's coming in at a much greater cost. So the $63,000 obviously will not do this expenditure, but I'll let the team explain the need and the overall cost related. So at this time, I'll introduce Doug Wickstrom.
Thank you, Mark. Mike, close enough. Can everybody hear me all right? We have, I'll introduce a few people. First of all, I'm part of the Community Center Committee. I've been part of that committee for I think 6 years now. Also on the committee is Joe Jogman. He was one of the original members. And we have Melanie Davis here, who's a new member and part of our committee. Larry Brown is also part of the committee. He's in Chicago today, visiting Northwestern for ICE checkup. And it's possible that Joy is on by Zoom. So Joy Schmidt.
She is.
Also with us is Jim Crawford. Jim Crawford is the owner of Lakeshore Mechanical. They're a mechanical contractor and have been for about 5 years now. They do all of our maintenance and repair work. When we started on this committee, we went through several mechanical contractors and found Lakeshore to be the one that is most responsive, largely because the project manager went to Long Beach Elementary School, so he buys into the whole thing, and we found that he was willing to show up anytime. And also with this is Brad Bullock. He's with Bullock Logan. Their representative, manufacturer's representative of Evapco. The current tower on the building is an Evapco tower. Evapco is a huge corporation, and Brad can speak to his background. I believe that their representative area, which includes us, but also includes a large part of Illinois as well. When we first got involved with this, and I have a PowerPoint that we could hook up that gives all of this history, but we're going to start out, I'm just going to give a brief introduction to this. When we got involved, this current mechanical system in the building was put in place in 1999. So that's right after the town acquired the school back from Michigan City Area Schools. So the systems that are there are about 22 years old, 23 years old. When we first got involved 5 years ago, 6 years ago with this, and looked at all of the systems and started finding out what you needed to be involved with, one of the things we found out was that the cooling tower had at that point already exhibited some issues. There have been several leaks in the coil and some problems with operation. And right at the beginning, we investigated who manufacturer, got the serial number, and we called Brad at that time, 5 years ago, Brad out there and looked at the coil and talked with him about what things we needed to do to extend its life and maintain it and so forth. And he gave us that information. We haven't really talked to him since then because we've managed to limp along. Every year or two, we would have to do something like a patch to the coils, one of the coils, or some other things. So, like kindergarten for our some special effects. This is one of the coils. This is one of the coils from the tower that was replaced, was taken out and replaced about 5 years ago, and the coil stopped up, essentially plugged, so it didn't leak anymore. So this gives you some idea what's in there. This is mild scale, and this is a piece of pipe from the water feed to the tower that was replaced about a year ago. So it gives you some idea of the corrosive conditions.
No, I mean, that's not what I explained, that's one line out of two coils, that's just one line out of hundreds that's in there.
And if we need to, we have photographs, I can show you what the coils are like, and the tower is like, basically, the tower, its purpose in the heat pump system that's there is to reject heat from the building to the atmosphere. So it's a very simple design. It's a series of these kinds of pipes that water passes through. If the water temperature gets high enough, water goes across there, it involves evaporative cooling, not unlike what you'd have in the radiator in your car. And it gets farther than the fan blows, just like in the radiator in your car to drop heat. Normally, every year, we shut the tower down in the fall, we fill it with a glycol solution so we don't get any more corrosion, and we don't have freezing and so forth. And then we start it up in the spring. And so we've done that for 5 years. This spring, last month in May, when we called Lakeshore, it's scheduled to start the tower. When they opened it up, they found that we had multiple leaks, and they could not patch them again. Primarily because there's so many, and some parts of the tower now are so fragile that just cutting them might cause further leaks. And partly because it's such a dense series of coils that you can't get at it without disassembling the whole thing. So we had information that a replacement coil, because you could take this whole section out of the tower, you have to disassemble the tower, lift off the top, put this new one in with a crane, and then put the old fan assembly up on top of that. So we got a price, we looked at the possibility of just doing that repair, and that was about $80,000. And there was about a 2 to 4 months delivery time. So then we said, well, if we're going to, first of all, we're going to spend that kind of money, what would it cost to put a new tower in place? And we got a quote of $116,000, which is more than we were expecting that it would be. But if you talk to anybody in construction over the last 6 months, it's full of surprises, and everybody is unbelievably hard up at work. I can go into stories on that if you want. So we had a situation where our current tower could not be replaced. A repair that would be required would take 2 to 4 months, but it was 2 to 4 months from the time you placed an order. So that meant if we went out to bid, we would have to have time for advertisement, collecting the bids and so forth. That would mean that those repairs would be this fall, past the cooling season. And if we put a new tower there, it was similar. So those were the facts that we were facing. So then we investigated portable AC units, which you authorized and put in the building. That is a Band-Aid. It is something that can allow us to limp along. In any particular room, one of those AC units is at best about a quarter of the regular air conditioning that's in there. We can kind of make the building habitable if we don't get more than 2 or 3 at most days of 90-degree weather. And well, beyond that, the units will not keep up. And so, so that's what we're facing. But we asked Lakeshore to investigate. We had any other options. I don't know, maybe there was a crew of people out there that did nothing but disassemble these towers and a crew of midgets maybe climb in there and get at this or something. Or there was some kind of magic liquid that we could pour through there that would plug up all the pinholes. We can see by the way that this is clogged and it's really past that. But there's also a secondary market of used equipment. And I mean, these things are used on everything from buildings like ours to high-rise buildings to processing plants to power plants. So Lakeshore worked with Logan because they're plugged into a much bigger market than we are. And they found a existing cooling tower that's never been used, and and it's immediately available. And we've learned that it's sitting in Illinois, southern Illinois, somewhere. And it could be here possibly in a week, and possibly would take maybe another week to get it installed. Those are very rough estimates right now. But that's the kind of timeline. So that's the things that are on the table. At this point, we think our options are limp along with what we have with portable units, and then go through whatever process the town wanted to do to see about a replacement or repair, meaning that we would do this work next spring, or we do something where we bring in something a little bit outside the box. Maybe not an ideal process, but this particular tower looks like it is a credible way to do this. And I'm not going to speak all the details about this. I'm going to let maybe Jim talk about it briefly, and then answer any questions that you have. And then Brad is available to tell you who he is and why, what experience and perspective he can bring to it. Before I turn it over to them, do you have any questions from your committee?
Doug, if either you or Jim could maybe talk about the benefits of the new coil system and the new tower, the difference between the current and the new.
The current tower is sized for the building, so it has a capacity, depending on whether or not it has glycol in it or running just water, approximately 63 to about 85 tons of cooling capacity. And it's constructed where the frame of it is galvanized steel, most of it's still in good shape, but the coil assembly is mild steel. It's not galvanized, and it's just plain steel. And the assumption is that you will run a solution through it that inhibits corrosion. And it has a life of some point, depending upon the circumstances, which could range from 20 years to 40 years, something like that. Very rough terms. This is me talking. The new tower, the size of it, first of all, it's part of an assembly where there were 3 of these towers put together for a much higher capacity. So we're taking one part of it that has a capacity roughly equivalent to our current tower. And it has a construction that is all stainless steel. There's no galvanized in the frame. And the tower and the coil itself is copper. So it has a life of probably 50 years. So we're looking at a tower that has a similar cooling capacity, maybe slightly greater, and is made for this kind of situation, but is made of much higher quality components and would have a life that will be farther. If we were going to replace the current tower in kind, this would be a step up from that. It's a better tower, just by circumstance. That respond to it? And any other?
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
And so what is being asked of the council today is to, if they're inclined to approve this request, is to enter into a special emergency option under the state code. So to be clear, as I understood it, the words of your mouth, the habitability issues, that this is not approved, assuming the council has their questions answered, assuming there are funds available to make it, that community centers potentially not habitable by those who are leasing space, using the space, or the summer program. Children are in and out of there, is that correct?
It is correct. I want to say that we have made a good effort to extend the habitability of the building in certain circumstances.
Sure, I'm not questioning that, and I understand what the usefulness of those, what I'm saying is overall, the issue is that it's not replaced.
But where I'm going with this is that if we have a few more days, get into August or even July, and we have a week of 90-degree weather, what we've done won't keep up with it. So, other question, I think that, and maybe I didn't mention, but the proposal for this tower is approximately $110,000. So that is the tower, purchase of the tower and the installation. There are some additional expenses that could come up that we don't fully foresee right now. For example, the current motor starters that are in the electrical panel might be desired to replace those. So there is a potential that we could have additional expense that might be in somewhere in the range of $5,000 to $10,000. So if you were to proceed, you might want to assume that you would have an allowance of that 110 of some amount beyond that. And is that fair what you're saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
Shipping that for action included with that.
that's what I was assuming. The thing about an allowance is it's intended to cover what you don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. It's not a new perspective.
Doug, I have a question. Where's the copper located? If it's ground level, would we lock it up then?
Well, that's a good question. It would be very difficult to get at. It's completely enclosed by the stainless steel enclosure, not visible. And, but yeah, I mean, if somebody knew it were there, I'll just get that.
Thank you.
Mary Lou, I think you bring up a good point too, something for the council to consider either for today or future discussion is if we do approve and move forward with this expenditure. Previously, there was a fence that was around the cooling tower. We may want to put a fence around this new one, not only to protect it from vandalism, but also the current fence that was there was hit by a car before. And we don't want a vehicle striking our new $110,000 purchase and then therefore making it inoperable. So that is something we may want to investigate down the road of making that purchase as well to put around there to protect our investment.
That was a Boy Scout Eagle project many years ago.
Yeah, the original, yeah.
Yes, I think it was Patrick Schreiber did that.
Okay.
I'm going to Jim, introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you for having me. My name is Jim Crawford. I'm a based here out of Michigan City. A little bit of history. I worked for Tom Blank from 1982 to 91. Mainly doing startup service and maintenance on any of their projects as far as HVAC equipment. So they're in obviously most of the commercial type industrial equipment. Then in 91, I ended up purchasing the service part of general construction. And been doing that ever since. Got into a lot of actually new construction when I did that on HVAC installs, different various general contractors, mainly Larson Daniels and Tom Blank area. My background was in service and maintenance. I found that rat race was just too much. I had too many employees that were trying to keep track of the job. So 2008, I went back to service and maintenance, mostly commercial systems. Lyle McLean has been one of my customers since the beginning, still are. Another one here in town is Hearthside Tubes, who maintain all their equipment. So I do have experience in this type of equipment, stuff moving.
That's pretty much it. We've been working with it for 5 or 6 years.
And just one correction, I think, Brad, when you look at the pictures there, the new unit is not all stainless steel, but the components and bases within the unit are stainless steel where water is actually in contact with. The exterior is, I'm sure, heavily galvanized. Okay. And that's just exposed to rain and snow.
And do I understand correctly that the unit is manufactured in Kansas? And the reason I ask is because the town has a purchasing preference of items made in America. So just want to verify based on looking into it quickly that it's manufactured in Parkey. Yes.
Thank you. Do you have any questions other than that? For me?
I do. Jim, appreciate your effort, helping years. I had a little experience years ago in the treatment industry, tower treatment industry, and I guess I have to ask, this new system, can you guys hear me? Yeah, this new system, even with the copper coils, if we wanted to have an extended life, I'm assuming we need a good treatment system, and I'm assuming also that we may not have done as well as we should have with the treatment system over the years, and that's probably why we're in the shape we're in with the current tower. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, we've tried off and on, and we've had a hard time finding, you guys have water treatment companies that are not only reliable, but just it seems like we just struggle with all, whatever they come in and recommend, and then they don't really follow up that much. But it'd be good to find a good water treatment company for sure.
Well, John, we've been using Zincan on South Bend for the last 5 years. And so they've provided treatment not only for the basin underneath the tower for biological, so scum and mosquitoes don't grow in there, but they also have been treating the interior loop of the building for corrosion prevention. And that's probably why we got the last 5 years of use out of it. That's probably what is extended. So
So a lot of that damage then, I'm sorry to interrupt, a lot of that damage may have happened earlier in the years when we weren't treating it properly then.
I don't know, I can't speak to that, so.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I guess the question for me is the copper doesn't allow you to not have a treatment system. You still need to treat the tower and the internals.
Yes, I would agree with that. But with treatment, you're probably talking about a much longer life, and it's more tolerant of variations in the treatment levels, I think would be my understanding.
Understood. Now the unit heater durability, one of my questions, and I think Mark had answered or asked one of these in his letter. One of the questions that this whole operation begs is, are we in the right wheelhouse? And I'm posing this to you, Jim, I guess as much as anybody. You know, my worry is, okay, if we've got 25 heat pumps and the tower is in as rough shape as it is, are we throwing good money after bad? Are all these unit heaters going to crap out on us in the next couple of years, or do we have any intelligence on that?
As far as the heat pumps themselves, they're kind of modular. Anything in there can be replaced. And we've done that. Compressors, motors. I don't foresee anything there that, I mean, granted, they are 20-some years old. There is going to be increased maintenance on them. It may be something to consider down the road to start replacing a few of those a year, maybe, just to save from having emergencies and breakdowns and things like that. But no, I think all in all, it's a good, solid system. No matter what you put in there, you're going to need a liquid cooler like this of some sort, and we're going to get into that too. I know there's some questions on alternatives for that liquid cooler tower out there, and that we thought just in our minds possibly like a smaller chiller, but that just wasn't really viable. And when we talked to engineers, included it, like now you're introducing a lot more moving parts, and they aren't designed to maintain that form of water, and so we just kind of steered away from that. But all in all, I think the system's, pretty solid. But it is like anything else, it'd probably be wise to start thinking about maybe changing out a few of those, a couple of them, whatever you can.
What are the costs of those heat pumps? What are the costs of one pump?
Okay. No, yeah. Both in the last 5 years and in previous lifetimes, we used heat pump systems like this occasionally on school projects, so I have some familiarity with this. The heat pumps in this building that we have found that we needed to replace, the last one we did was about $5,500. That was a couple of years ago. Probably the next one, you can imagine it would be north of that. There are approximately 25 of them in the building. The moving parts are really two things. There's a fan and a little compressor in each one, and then some electronics and some relays and valves and so forth. We have found with Dax, that works at Lakeshore, that he's able to extend the life on those heat pump units because he's willing and they're able to go in and replace relays and do some of the valve replacements. Previously, one of the reasons we switched to Lakeshore was because of that capability. Previously, we found that the contractor we were using, whenever we ran into something with one of the heat pumps, all they wanted to do was drop it off, put a new one in place, which cost at that time was, close to $5,000 to put it in there. Having said that, the expected life of these heat pumps is unknown, but they start to fail after about 20 to 25 years of life initially, and then there's a curve. And if you look at the capital plan that we put together recently, it showed an assumption that we would have to replace 2 to 3 of those going forward The advantage of replacing them going forward is the newer ones are a little quieter, and you can select some that have less of that hammering noise where they're exposed. So, but the system as a whole is sound, and as Jim said, it's relatively easy to drop one of those and put a new one, or to repair them in place if you need. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, I agree that we ought to have a plan to just replace 2 or 3 every year, because eventually they're all gonna go, no matter how you maintain them, but we can maintain them, as long as we can, but I hate to see like 10 or 15 of them go bad at once. I mean, that's the worry there, but.
Yeah, I would say that's certainly possible, but based on our experience, it's unlikely, very unlikely. So, but it will happen. I mean, if you look at a time horizon of 20 years, then
Yeah.
some of them are going to be outside of their life.
One more technical question probably for Jim. So the closed loop that goes from the chiller through the unit heaters, there's piping run all through the building. Do we have any intelligence on that closed loop? If I'm assuming closed loop, and then is that thing more fail safe with or without the new tower?
You cut out on me there. Are you asking about the actual piping of the loop that goes through the school and picks up all the heat pumps?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether there is an issue with the actual piping in addition to this. Believe me, I'm not questioning the logic in what you guys are proposing. What I'm suggesting is how much more exposure, just like John Coker just asked about the cost of the units over time. Is the piping at risk?
Oh, no, it's all PVC. I doubt that there's any, wear on that piping or any buildup of any kind of calcium deposits or anything like that. That's the beauty of CCC. So, yeah.
You're looking at a filter system put in place last year to deal with some of the sediment.
Yeah.
Introduced in the system.
And that was in the unit status system. The filter system we actually put in this past year will help take a lot of junk out of water, actually.
So essentially, then I'm not looking at the capital plan right now, Doug, but essentially, if we're looking at, 100.5 or whatever it's going to take to get this thing in there plus a fence, or, whatever your new shipping costs are we then projecting out, then we're probably looking at, 30 to 25 to 40 or whatever it's going to be annually then in terms of these unit heater replacements. I know we haven't budgeted that quite as quickly as that, but you have a rough feel for what you're thinking?
Well, we had budgeted 1 to 2 to 3 for every year going forward, depending on if they actually fail. And I don't see any reason why it would exceed that. And if we wait until they actually fail before we replace them, then probably we wouldn't use that money. It's impossible to know, but we put that in there more as a alarm that might happen down the road rather than something that we expected to happen.
Right, but the projection, if you said you spent 5 or 6 on the last one, we're going to probably approach 10 on one looking forward, maybe 8 or 10, I don't know. So really, we ought to be, I'm not trying to get an answer out of you as much as I am trying to understand it from the budget and finance side of life. We ought to be looking at, 30 or something a year probably to project out to replace them all, right?
30 would be, I would call it a very safe number.
Okay.
And is there a warranty on this cooling tower?
Yes, now that Brad skipped to that. So I'll kind of back up. My name is Brad Bullock. I'm the Vice President of Bullock Logan Associates. Just a little bit about my background. My father was a mechanical engineer, started this company 30-some years ago, in high school, I grew up reconditioning cooling towers or evaporative equipment. I went to school at Marquette University for my electrical engineering degree, worked for Square D Company, worked for General Electric, and then wanted to work for a smaller company and went to work for my father 23 years ago. We sell evaporative cooling equipment. We're all engineers. We have crews that recondition evaporative cooling equipment. We sell chillers. We sell heat pumps. And I've worked with the Willis Tower, John Hancock Building, Rush Hospital, Northwestern Hospital, University of Chicago Hospital, all on the design of their evaporative cooling heat rejection. Consulting engineers that design entire systems come to Bullock Logan to help with our portion of the system, which we specialize in, and that's the evaporative cooling portion. So I'm sure there's a lot smarter people in the room than I, but there's probably not many people in the area that know more about evaporative cooling equipment. So we're the manufacturer representatives for Evapco, which is what I've talked to Doug about in terms of that's what you have now. It's a 67-ton unit. So factory lead times are really extended across the board now. Evapco is running about 16 to 18 weeks for new equipment, maybe a few weeks shorter than that just for replacement coil section. But there are three main manufacturers of equipment: Evapco, Baltimore Aircoil, and Marley. They're all quality manufacturers. And we have crews that recondition all manufacturers' equipment. So I know the ins and outs of other manufacturers' equipment, but not just my own. There are pros and cons of every piece of equipment, even though they're all relatively similar. The main pro in this case being the materials of construction. This new unit's actually about 103 tons currently with a 20 horsepower motor. We'll BCF size that to match your current electrical load. Your current equipment's 10 horsepower. Once we lower that, you lose about 10% performance in every motor horsepower decrease. So from a 20 to a 15 is about 10%. From a 15 to a 10 is about 10%. So you'll be left with a piece of equipment that's about 25% oversized based on what you have now. The cooling tower will have a 2-speed motor, a 2-speed fan motor. It just means sometimes with compressorized equipment, you get concerned about oversized equipment and cycling and so forth. With this, it just means that your cooling tower will run with just the pump rejecting the spray pump. There's a 2 or 3 horsepower spray pump that sprays water with a coil for the evaporative effect. It means that it will be able to reject the heat just based on that 2 horsepower spray pump a little more often, or 3 horsepower. And then it will run on low speed more often than high speed with your current cooling tower. And as the ambient temperature increases and your fluid cooler, evaporative fluid cooler can send cooler water back to your heat pump loop based on the oversize, based on the 25% oversize. So I forget what your question was, or if you asked one yet, but. I asked okay, the warranty. So the warranty is 1 year. So it's a 1-year warranty that covers parts and shipping to get the parts. It doesn't include the replacement of those parts. So on this piece of equipment, there's really, I'll say 3 potential areas of failure. One is the spray pump. There's a 3 horsepower spray pump. One is the fan motor.
there's a 10 horsepower fan, or there will be, and then the other are fan shaft bearings. So the bearings are rated for, I think, 100,000 hours. There are belts, which are easily replaceable, multi-fan solid mass back belts. And then the fan and the pump. So there's not a lot of moving parts to this equipment. And with proper, as you suggested, water treatment, which is important, there's no reason you shouldn't get 25 to 30 years of life out of this.
With this new equipment, will this in any way decrease the noise our air conditioner makes, particularly in the gym, or is that the heat pumps making all that noise?
That's the heat pumps. One of those fail, if they place it, you select the newer one that had better sound controls.
Dr. May, talking to Doug and Joe, I think when we go to replace heat pumps, that's one of the areas we want to first address is the gym area. As I learned last year, turning those on, they are extremely loud during meetings.
Define the basketball.
I have a question. I used to work for architects and engineers, and we did research. And one of the things that always came up when people would complain about us is home air conditioning. And what they found out was that if you bought too big a unit, your home didn't cool as well.
Correct.
So would that be an issue?
It wouldn't, it's good, and I kind of imagine, that's with compressorized equipment, when you're trying to deal with, especially with humidity control. So if you have in your unit, in your home, it's trying to maintain a certain temperature. If you have too large equipment, it drops the temperature real quick to satisfy the thermostat for that space, but it doesn't get out the humidity that you're trying to. So now with oversized equipment, they put variable speed compressors and variable speed fans on so you can run the unit for longer and take the humidity out of the space. But in this particular case, this is just lowering the loop temperature of your heat pump loop. And there's really no negative to an oversized unit. It just, it will satisfy. And truthfully, the positive is that over time, you lose about 1.5% to 2% efficiency just due to natural fouling, build up on the coil, build up on the fill surfaces. So if your unit's oversized, you're just going to notice that less and less over the lifespan of the equipment.
And I have one other question, maybe this is for Doug. When it got so cold in the winter and something went out, was that a heat pump? And it burst in the room where they play bridge?
Yes, that was one of the heat pumps. It's in that storage room, next to the corridor. In that particular case, the coil froze up.
Okay. Because that was, you had to wear a winter coat to walk in school.
Yeah, yes. Well, we were replacing the boilers at that time.
Just from a technical, I'm sorry, from a technical standpoint then, before we lose you, and I know it sounds like you're more in the evaporative realm, but when you look at a building with this many small rooms, I would assume that this system is about as good as you can do it. Mark had asked about more of a typical condenser sort of a situation. I mean, I think of hotels with the little, room units and that sort of thing as an alternative to this sort of system. Is there anything you can talk to us about in terms of whether this system in general is appropriate for this space that we're trying to cool and heat?
Yeah, it's very common. Heat pump systems are very common for schools, for retirement homes, anywhere where there's multiple spaces that could have different demands for heating and cooling. Heat pump systems are very efficient by nature as they'll share they'll take the heat rejected in one area of the building and use it in another area of the building, minimizing the overall electrical consumption. So if you kind of compare this to, so you have 25 heat pumps in the building, and I know there's talk about kind of supplementing the system with an air-cooled chiller versus a evaporative fluid cooler. A typical air-cooled chiller is about 1.5 kW per horsepower power consumption. So for this particular building, it'd probably be about a 75 horsepower compressor in a air-cooled chiller. 75 horsepower compressor at 208 volts is about a 225 amp full load amp draw. This cooling tower has a 10 horsepower motor and a 3 horsepower pump. You know, the amp draw on a 10 horsepower motor is 32 amps at 208 volts. So the power consumption is significantly less than most air-cooled systems that you find. So this building, if it were designed new, you know, a building this size, typically they would put an air-cooled system now, just because they're cheap from a first cost standpoint. But you pay for it in energy consumption over the lifespan of the building. So it's a very nice system. It just seems less and less, you know, I'll say sometimes government-funded buildings, they'll do it right on the front end and put in an efficient system. It seems in the private sector, they might be more worried about first cost, and you see less and less of these systems being installed at this size. Anyway, the larger you get, the more you find these systems.
Understood. So it's not an inefficient system by any means, and it's probably money well spent to continue to use this type of system. Understood.
Any other questions? Doug, how much were we talking again?
Yeah, just see.
We had a proposal from Lakeshore, and I think you have copies of that. That was 110,000, 110,420. That was an emergency sort of thing, and it covered the firing of the compressor or the tower and the installation. It did not include the shipping. Right now, we're guessing that that's another $2,500. And it did not include replacing the motor starters that are in the current electrical panel, which at this point, we're guessing that it was another $2,500 roughly. We can firm those numbers up. That was the point of the assumption that there might be a need for an allowance of another $5,000 to $10,000. It might go beyond that. Given the rate at which we've been moving on this, there's always the danger that you'll just move a little bit faster than your headlights here again. I mean, if you proceed on an emergency basis, we may encounter some other things. That's the only reason. Normally, everything in a process like this, you're trying to minimize everything unknown, not foreseeing any surprises. And so right now, those are the things that we know that we will encounter. There may be some more, but it seems unlikely.
So based on our previous discussions and that, would you feel comfortable if we asked the council for $125,000 expenditure approval, not to exceed that?
At this point, yes. That confirm that would be a safe number based on everything we know.
All right, Mark, do you want to think about that, the cost of that fence as well?
Great point, John, and I think what I'll do is, we'll work on getting a cost estimate from like two companies, like, Michigan City Fence and another, to see what that is, and then hopefully get it all in for everything we're talking about today for $125,000. Then I can email everybody, let you know what the fence quotes come in at.
So Chris, in terms of our ability to do this, to take advantage of the time frame, is this some sort of emergency appropriation, or do you have a construct that's going to be sufficient for us?
I think there are two avenues. Sorry, I'm talking over. So you have two avenues. One is, all right, so you have two avenues. One is that there's a demonstrated significant discount that is available by virtue of this unit being available. And two, based on Doug's representations and him speaking on behalf of the committee, it appears that there is an emergency that in terms of the health, welfare, and safety of those that are lessees and otherwise used, that if you make that determination, that you would be on solid ground to move forward with this alternative purchasing process.
There is one other thing. The current cooling tower is sitting on Pegram, which works fine for, it's sat there for over 20 years. Current manufacturer, all MAPCO or any other manufacturer would recommend some sort of a concrete pad or a precast bearing system underneath that. So there may be a need there. We probably will want to at least investigate that. One of the things in this situation we want to look at, though, is that whole sequence of operations. For example, we don't want to take the existing tower away and then have to wait a week while we pour another concrete pad underneath it and so forth. So we need to do a little bit of homework on exactly how we would deal with that. There might be some money associated with that. I don't think it's very much, but I just need to mention that.
And then to Jim's point on the installation, the crane, everything that's needed to bring the system in, unload it off of a freight bringing here, setting it, all that's included in that 110.
Other than now, what we were just talking about, the lack of equipment at there, keeper has working, this far, like Brad said, manufacturer would never, ever recommend that, recommend it. So one other thing I think of is trying to get that all coordinated, so where you have a decent amount of downtime in the building, but, we don't want to bring a crane ourselves. Yeah, I don't want to do so. It should be less, but,
So maybe after this meeting, if you gentlemen can stay around with myself and Joe or the committee, we can discuss kind of a timeline and a sequence, and then figure out about the concrete quotes and fencing and that, so after the meeting.
yes.
Chris, this is John. Can we authorize, under this alternative purchasing construct, can we authorize a large enough amount to cover all this without being in that specific?
Well, I think you're going to need the support of the paper, but you can, based on what's been submitted here, and then filling it in, you can authorizing not to exceed amount, and again, under the basis that I've already laid out for you.
Why don't we consider a motion in the neighborhood of 150 just to cover all these bases rather than having to come back and do it again? Number one, I think we want to make sure we capture the unit that's available so that these guys walk out of this meeting with the ability to capture that unit, and then that we also don't shortchange ourselves on some of these additional items. I appreciate, Doug, all your guys' efforts to keep the numbers as tight as you can, but if we're at 116 and we're anticipating concrete and fencing and some of these other things, I could see us easily get closer to 100 and a half.
But I would suggest, and I think that the chief is already saying this, is to entertain and invite some quotes from multiple subcontractors so that we make sure the fencing and the concrete that should get difficult and done.
I have no problem with John's recommending. I think that's reasonable, and then we'll work on making sure we keep our costs as efficient as possible.
Yeah, I'd go ahead and make a motion that we authorize all this for not to exceed 150,000 and get the ball rolling.
I would second that.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote. John Wall.
I'm in favor.
John Coker.
I'm in favor.
Mary Lou.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor. Mike Johnson.
Aye.
Okay, good deal.
Before they leave, I think many, and I know the public knows this all the time, the community center volunteers put in. And I think it is very well appreciated. Because we would have to hire a consultant for all the work you guys have done, including Joy out there, if she's there. So,
She's there.
okay, thank you.
Okay, next agenda item, purchase email addresses for, our committee members. So the concern is that we have, the Long Beach IN, email addresses for town council. And I believe that's, and of course, for comparing his people, but I don't believe we do for any of the other committees, and the concern is that we probably should have those, or at least some of our committees, and I guess we need to talk about that. Cost is not huge, right, Chief?
Well, here's what I suggest on that. I suggest that if you're inclined as the town council, that you allow Chief and I to come back at the next regular meeting. Because this is something that has been talked about over several years. Chief is implementing and doing some of the things that the town should be doing in terms of those emails. But I would suggest that you will authorize he and I to discuss and work on retention plans as well as an email proposal of what we think, and really to educate and share with the various boards and committees via memo form so that everybody, while we have shared information, provided information, attempted to educate those, especially those that are new, those that are on regular committees or boards who may not even be aware that they're conducting town business. Again, despite sharing that, they don't go to the elected officials' schools and those types of things. So I think that would be the best handled and probably the best use of time that Chief and I put together what we think is the suggested policy, and then the town adopting that and us making that a little more.
And I guess my one thought is to consider is that maybe it doesn't need to be all committees. We've got tree board, police advisory board, things like that may not need,
But not getting too far ahead, but I don't think people appreciate it. Again, we've shared many times, personal emails are subject to public records requests.
Yeah.
And the town has certain retention requirements for town business. So I'm going to plant that seed yet again, that you just need to consider.
maybe. Yeah, that's the other thing I guess we need to figure out in terms of this too. So yeah, there's lots to consider. Okay, so yeah, let's have you guys get together and give us a recommendation. Finally, the tree removal at 1302. John, do we have hard numbers on that?
Yes, we do. What the hard numbers we got was $9,000, I believe, and $82, or just a little bit over, a little less than $9,100, of which the resident will pay half.
That's for removal, grinding, and everything?
Yes, removal, grinding, and putting dirt in or whatever to make it.
How many trees, John, how many trees is that? Is that all the big cottonwoods or just one of them? Or
4.
got it.
So I get the town share of that being $4,541?
Yeah, it'd be a little less than, something like that. A little more, 4,500 plus a little.
Okay, so Chris, do we need to have that in some kind of a contractual form with homeowners?
We probably should at least have some form of, even if it's via email, reiterate that you don't have to, but you get to, decide to share this cost. And I think it's a little bit of a unique circumstance, but I would find it sufficient to even an email exchange where they acknowledge that they're going to pay half of that versus what the cost of the drafting the contract or understand. I think that was sufficiently.
I think that's all the homeowner wants, was some email confirmation, and then, I presume the town would enter into the contract with the tree man. I believe that's who's gonna do it. And then, the homeowner would reimburse the town.
I make a motion to authorize an expenditure of $4,541. Move the trees at, 1302 Lakeshore Drive.
Second.
Any other discussion? All right, John Wall.
Aye.
Scott Coker.
Aye.
I'm an aye. Mike Johnson.
Aye.
Good deal. I don't have any other business on my agenda. Public comment. Go ahead, Nate.
Good morning, Anita Ramages, 2300 Floral Drive. I want to let you know that individually as a member of Park Board, I am Park Board absolutely against destroying the road, cutting the trees, stop 13. The cost, even with nice people referenced by Councilman Coker paying 50%, it's still $4,500 out of the town budget that now is authorizing $150,000 for a cooling tower. We are looking at appropriations in the near future for salaries, for overtime, for training, for insurance. We're looking at a cost now that the sewer has been rejected by Michigan City. And I know that the sewer was brought up as one of the reasons why these trees should be taken down, and that's out of the question now. The danger of limbs falling on a driveway can happen anytime, anywhere. It sets a precedent for the town to become a piggy bank to entertain requests and pay money to homeowners who simply want to get their construction project done easier and more efficiently, allowing for more equipment. There were 3 evaluations done. The initial one by the owner that just said to tear down and spray the trees. The tree board had 2 evaluations done. Both said they were healthy trees. And I know that Mr. Johnson has mentioned one, talked about deep roots, and we all know that cottonwoods at this point are shallow roots that could have easily been looked into and corrected. The park board maintains and pays for the stop 16 Cottonwood Road. Mr. Coker is the liaison. He knows that we do that. He never asks the opinion of the park board. And there may be a possibility he should recuse himself because he knows what we do with the other cottonwoods. Mary Lou McFadden is the new tree board liaison. When this issue first came up and the Burks entertained the $15,000 bill, she blurted out junk trees when it first came up about cottonwoods. And again, I just do not think that it's a good expenditure of $4,500 for the town at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Any other public comments? All right, otherwise I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I second it.
Actually, I entertain it. You made a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Yeah.
Thank you.